All right, so I had this harebrained idea, Logan.
Yes.
What do you reckon? I was thinking the other day because it was cloudy and rainy and I'd not done anything in weeks. I was thinking about like, would it be good to have like a chat about rigs to start out for people? Because I was thinking back a year ago, I've only been doing this 1 year now, but I was thinking like that was the most confusing thing when I was starting out, is working out what the hell to choose. And like, watching reviews and watching different people recommend things didn't necessarily always make it clearer to me, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of just, it's been probably realistically since I started doing astrophotography, just over 2 years for me.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, and I certainly, there's things I would do differently, definitely did, which was ended up being a bit costly as well.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Because you feel like you're gonna have to dive in, and then it's like, oh my god, what if I make a mistake and all that. So, because I've written some things down on paper here, and like these are things like that I was thinking about when I was first getting it. Obviously, like cost was a big one. I've put down like focal length, interests, because then I started to learn, galaxy, then there's wide, and then there's nebula. Then I've put down DSLR, one shot color, dedicated, mono dedicated, portability, and then I've got what mount type, like do you get a heavy mount, do you get a lighter one? And then I've got like connectivity, so you're going to use a mini PC, or you're going to use your laptop, or you're going to buy an ASI Air, and then like you're trying to make a decision about where the hell do I land, where do I land in this. And it's I just thought like maybe it'd be good if me and you have a chat about like what our first rig was, and like and where we decided to go. And as you've been doing it like double the length of me, then
yes, I've made double the mistakes, I'm sure.
So what was your first like astronomy thing, like even telescope, even if it wasn't astrophotography?
Well, yeah, so I wanted to, having done it like 30 something years earlier, I wanted to get back into it. And of course, back then, I didn't really know much about what was available. And so go-to mounts were really like unknown to me, because the original mount 35 years ago had a motor in it, but it didn't have a go-to function. And so trying to find anything was difficult. We also had an 8-inch SCT, so all I knew about was SCTs. So of course I thought, oh, I'll get an SCT again, but I won't get a 8-inch SCT. If I'm going to start out, I must go bigger, because bigger is better. So I'll get a 10-inch SCT. So that was probably like, do I regret it? No, because I've got the SCT and I'm using the SCT. As a first choice, not a good idea, I think, because they are big beasts. They are big beasts to control. They are big beasts to maneuver. So you need to have like a heavy mount to actually cope with it. I've somehow got to turn off these Instagram notifications.
So popular.
And so that was my mistake. And the other thing I didn't realize was, I was like, oh yeah, I hadn't really thought about visual versus photography. And I figured that using a equatorial mount was going to be really tricky to work out. And therefore an AZ mount would be much easier to do. So I got an AZ mount. Again, a big mistake, because that didn't give me the option to do visual and photography if I wanted to, whereas an equatorial will give you at least the option for both of those.
Yeah.
I would say don't get an AZ mount if you think you're going to be wanting to do photography, because that 30-second limit, which is basically what you get, is going to be quite limiting very, very quickly.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I would say, don't go for a 10-inch SCT. Go for something that is smaller and more easy to deal with, and not as heavy to deal with. Now, then you come down to, do you then do a refractor, do you Newtonian? And of course, then I think price comes into a factor there.
Yeah.
Because Newtonians are cheaper, way cheaper, but they still give you excellent, I mean, you see fantastic images. Refractors are really nice as well, but they will cost. And I think that too, if budget isn't an issue, well, I've never used a Newtonian, so I can't really comment, whereas you can comment on that respect. I think refractor is a fantastic telescope, so if you can afford it, get a good get a nice refractor, like a triple refractor, if you're looking ahead. But again, it's cost involved. If cost is an issue, Newtonian is a great option, I think, because of the quality of the images that you can get from a Newtonian, but they don't cost as much. You do, obviously, there's the other issue about the size of the Newtonian as well, and also with wind and being a bit of a sail, which is the same issue with 10-inch Meade. Whereas I don't find the Skywatcher to suffer anywhere near as much from wind as I do from the 10-inch Meade.
So that's basically just where we're talking about. That's basically just where you might get a slight, even if it's just like kind of a strong breeze, on a big scope. On a big scope, it'll maybe affect your stars, especially if you're not in an observatory.
And you're going to lose subs, and you could. I've had quite a lot of frustration with the 10-inch. And again, also if you've got if you get a telescope that's big and heavy, you need a mount that's big and heavy to cope with it, and that's cost again. I'd say astrophotography, I'd say go equatorial mount straight off. You'll learn it quite quickly. Don't be sort of concerned by it, and it's way easier nowadays with plate solving things, with sharp cap and what Nina can do. So all that complexity, I think, has gone out the window of trying to line up the star and that star and then go halfway in between. And
I found that out. I'm not into that. I found that out quick.
That's what put me off. That's why I went the AZ mount routine, was I think that's so it's on the shoot. And then I would say go for a more wider field sort of setup. I'd say less. I think if you're it doesn't hurt if you go less than 1,000 millimeters focal length, then you're not going to necessarily want to get rid of that. It'll still cover that area, so it's still a keeper.
It's like you say, it's that knowing where. It's like knowing where to dive in. So it's like you're not going to grow out of it within like a month type of thing.
No,
because that's one thing I found that's been really good about, like when I got my 80 mil refractor, is now I still really like that focal length, and it's so useful for things. And so I've still, even though I have my Newtonian now, which has pushed me up to 750 millimeter, the refractor that's down with the focal reducer down at about half, 390, it's so versatile in what you can take with it. And like you say, it's so forgiving. I don't, even with a strong breeze, I don't seem to have issues with blurred, stars, or, my guiding doesn't need to be perfect and that type of thing. So it makes such a difference, doesn't it?
And I think also, you don't want people to get put off. And a lot of people do get put off. And I've seen a lot of people go, on the forum saying, I've had enough. I mean, I had times like that. It took me 4 nights to work out how to polar align. But I think you don't want it to be too difficult where people go, oh, this is a waste of time. I can't keep any subs. It all looks terrible. I've got elongated stars and everything. And that's why I think if people start a bit wider field and they can actually get some images that they're very proud of, I guess the biggest thing I'd say is don't go too high focal length.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, because even and I kind of went a similar route to you in that I didn't really get into visual. Well, I've got into astrophotography now in the last year, but before that, probably about a good 10 years ago, my very first scope was a 8-inch Dobsonian. And it's interesting because I had no clue where to hop onto the hobby. And I initially thought, I don't necessarily want to take photographs. And a lot of people were saying to me and on forums, get an 8-inch Dob because they're great value for money, which I totally agree with, because it's basically a Newtonian scope on a swivelly wooden base. But I soon found that with that in my back garden, I got a little bit bored of, I'm not sure if bored is the right word, but I got a bit lazy and I didn't want to carry the whole thing out. And then I found that, I'm looking at the moon a lot. And then I'm looking at, I think I got a Barlow at the time, a 2x Barlow, and I looked at Saturn and Jupiter. But you can only do that for so long. Well, for me, I'm sure for some people, they're much more focused on visual. But in terms of astrophotography, I ended up getting a DSLR and I managed to get some pictures of the moon, which I thought were amazing. But within sort of maybe 3-4 months, I was kind of over it. And I just thought to myself, well, it's not for me. And I basically sold that scope.
I think where I think the Dobsonians are quite good. I mean, I've never owned one, so and they're very. I think for someone who's just done nothing before and doesn't know much about it and doesn't even know whether they're going to be really wanting to continue.
That's yeah.
The Dob is probably quite good because of the fact that it's not too expensive.
Yeah.
And it means it's not a lot of wasted money if you then go, actually, no, this isn't for me. It was fun, but I enjoyed the moon. I joined planets for a bit, but really, I think once you get into it, often you get hooked and you get obsessed, and that's the problem. Is that then you want to start, the money pit opens up because you want to head down all sorts of paths and do everything. Yeah. But it's a good. I think that they're a good idea to start with to see whether, and you'll be able to sell it because there's still always people.
Yeah, I sold that pretty easy. I think the only advice I would give is if you're going to go a Dobsonian, maybe, I don't know, it depends how much you like it, but I'd probably say just go a slightly smaller one than I got, because I got a big 8-inch one. I'd probably I'd probably go a 6-inch tube, you know what I mean? Something like that. But yeah, that was, and then I moved on about 3 years ago. I did the same thing as you then. I thought to myself, I'll get a go-to, and I got one of those shiny Celestron, go-tos, and that was an 8-inch as well. Yeah. And unfortunately, the same thing happened to me where I realized, just like what you say, once I go above 30 seconds, or whatever, I can't really take images at that point. And I sort of got a bit bored again of the whole, just looking at the moon and the planets and things like that. I ended up sort of getting rid of that. And I started to think, maybe this is not for me at all. And I'd shied away from the whole, what you said, the equatorial mount. I'd always shied away from that because I thought, oh my God, that looks so complicated. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that. So I really shied away from it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of thing sort of to say now is that dealing with an equatorial mount is actually I think it's way more easy than it was sharp cap and doing the plate solving thing, whereas, and in the Northern Hemisphere, obviously a little easier when you've got Polaris, but down the Southern Hemisphere, we don't. We have a selection of stars that you've got to start tweaking around, and it just did look a bit like a nightmare. But now it's just simple as, and even as with Nina, you don't have to be pointing in the right direction. Yeah. You can be pointing. You can say, well, that was the other thing was like, some people might think, but I can't see Polaris or I can't see the South Celestial Pole from where I want to set up my telescope. But of course, now with Nina, you don't have to, because you can point it.
How would you explain plate solving to a newbie? Because it's probably, sometimes I found it confusing that you've got your hand controller and then kind of got plate solving as well. And as soon as I found plate solving, I kind of never went back to the hand controller. Yeah. How would you explain plate solving? What is it?
I'd say it's like wallpaper pattern matching or picture matching. So as far as I understand it, is that obviously there's these big databases of the stars, and your telescope takes an image of where it's looking at, and it knows the field of view because you told it that information. And so it looks at it and it recognizes the pattern of stars. It checks it with its database and it comes back and goes, yep, this is where I know I am based on the pattern of stars. Yeah. And then from there, it can tell you how much you need to move things to polar align or whatever like that. Or it knows with a lot of the software how much it needs to move the target to move the telescope to actually have the target you want in field of view. That's my understanding of it. Yeah. I presume that's correct, actually.
I'm pretty sure that's correct, but it was a huge game changer for me. Because again, I just figured out with sharp cap polar aligning, and I guess again for anybody that doesn't know, so for polar aligning in the Southern Hemisphere, like you say, first time I got my HEQ5 mount, I'm looking through the polar scope and I'm going, how does anybody do this? Because I couldn't see anything through that bloody polar scope. Yeah. So pretty much the next week, I got a guide camera and a guide scope. And then you get Sharp Cap, which has got its polar alignment routine. Yeah. And it literally takes you 5 minutes by using plate solving and it looking at the sky and a camera to get aligned, doesn't it? It's like such a game changer. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then plate solving on top of that. Yeah. As soon as I found that, again, I was like, do I want to do plate solving? I've only just figured out this. But if you just spend those few hours working it out and installing it, as soon as you use it, you don't go back, do you? It's like, I've never used my hand controller.
Yeah, it takes the mystery out of an equatorial mount, out of you learning how to use an equatorial mount, basically, and the whole polar aligning thing. Plate solving just solves all that worry, all that confusion.
Good word. Solves.
Yeah.
And that, I should mention that, by the way, is a really small equatorial mount in the background.
Yeah. Well, they look like that is a fantastic portable setup.
I'll bring that slightly more into.
Yeah. Why don't you bring that over? I'm gonna have a bite of my toasted cheese sandwich.
Yeah, I'm gonna have my muesli bar as well. But yeah, it's a bit bedraggled at the moment because I've recently had to rob everything off it to put it on my other mount. But that's basically like a really small. This is a Skywatcher AZ GTI, and it's just basically got it's sat on a wedge, a Skywatcher wedge, and it's just basically adapted what is normally just an Alt-Az mount, which we were talking about before, into an equatorial mount. But that thing's great for DSLRs or really small setups, probably like your Red Cat as well. I've seen people use this a lot with the small wide fields. And
again, I've got the Ioptron. What's the Ioptron one? That's the small one, portable one.
Oh yeah, Skyguider, is it?
Skyguider Pro. If I was purchasing that again, I'd probably get what you've got.
Yeah.
Instead, the reason being is that one that you've got there has the go-to function.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas the Skyguider Pro does not. Same with the Skywatcher, the other version of the portable mount that they've got that doesn't have the go-to function. And again, it seemed like a great idea to portability, but boy, trying to find stuff wasn't easy.
I know, you've probably seen on my videos, my other one, like the one you mentioned, the Star Tracker from Skywatcher. What do they call it? Star Adventurer. That lasted about 6 weeks, and I swapped it because once you've used go-to and plate solving, at least for someone as lazy as me, I can't go back to, I think that's, just.
I think there's a quiv lazy geek in all of us, I think. Yeah. But it is, it's just because you also want to get started, and having spent, I remember I managed to find the Rosette Nebula quite easily because of where it was roughly between a couple of stars. But then trying to find something else, I remember looking for the Cat's Paw Nebula. And I spent 45 minutes to an hour trying to find it, and then managed to find it. And that can be pretty frustrating.
That one's got the ASI Air on it as well. Yeah. Which again, they've sort of become really popular, haven't they, in the last, I guess, I don't know, maybe 2 years, is it? Something like that.
Yeah.
And that's got the all-in-one. You connect to it through your phone if you want, through a tablet, and then everything's basically controlled through it, like your go-to and your plate solving. It's got a polar alignment on it. So it's like it's become so accessible to get into the hobby, hasn't it? And I reckon overall, even if you just got that, which is probably about, I don't know, like maybe about 800 Australian dollars for the mount, including like the wedge and stuff. And then the ASI Air is probably about 400 or 500. And then if you want to start with, you can still use your DSLR.
Yeah.
And a long lens. I know it's not ideal, but to get into it, sometimes that's not a bad way to do it.
Yeah. I think that would be a really great setup to get into for getting into it, particularly because again, like something like that, I don't think you can really grow out of that.
No.
It's still, excuse me, I'm gonna have to cut a hole.
That's all right. We can eat during this. It's our YouTube, video, so we can do what we like. Yeah.
I know Chuck eats his nuts all the way through his live field, so that's fine.
I know. And they know we're from down under as well.
Exactly.
We in Australia, we've got no manners. So yeah.
I think that if somebody wanted to really start, that's not a bad place to start, actually.
Yeah.
It's not too expensive. You will still want to use it later on. You won't grow out of it because you'll grab it as a portable rig to go somewhere. You can use it for doing nice wide field, Milky Way shots if you want to.
Yeah.
Or you could stick something like a red cat on it and zoom in a bit further to get a nice shot of Rosette Nebula or something like that. So at a absolute start, as a starting point, that's I think a fantastic place to start.
And I really want to, I haven't had much chance to do it yet, but one of my ideas for this is to be able to I can pretty much shove it in the car, in the footwell of the car as it is, and just drive about half an hour away, get to a Bortle 4 or 3, and then, just have a bit of fun with it, because it's so easy just to chuck in a car. Yeah.
So next thing, if I was talking about mounts, for example.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Where would you go with the mount?
So if I'm not obviously doing that setup there as a portable thing, I would make sure I got a mount. I think if I was going to decide I was going to have a setup at home and I didn't mind carrying a mount in and out, or if I was going to put it on a trolley system like Ray has, where you can wheel it in and out, and like Chuck does, he wheels his out because he puts wheels underneath it.
Yeah.
I have sort of, when I've mentioned it to other people, I've said, look, try and think about what you may want to do in the future, that you may want to get a bigger telescope and have your mount more versatile without having to buy another mount, which they're not, the cheapest things in the world. So I would have thought that if I was advising somebody, I would say go for something that's got a bit of grunt to it, that can take a bit of weight, because then it will give you some versatility for later on. And so that's where I found the CEM60 was a really good place for Ioptron. Again, you can probably talk about, because you got Skywatcher.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the CEM60 I thought was a really good option. And now there's the CEM70, because the 60 is basically gone as far as I know, and they've replaced it with the 70. That will, you can run a little small scope on it, but you can still run something like a 10-inch mead on it. And I think that also because of the weight that it can take, I would say don't look at the weight capacity. If they say the weight capacity is, 25 kilos, probably think that you want to be under 20 kilos.
Yeah.
Because if, they say it can do that, but it'll always struggle the heavier it is, and the closer to its capacity. So I would say think about what you think you might want later on, and whether, again, if you've got plenty of money, then not an issue, because you can go, well, I'll just get a big amount later on. Yeah. But if money is an issue, which it is, then it will give you a bit more versatility to have something heavy that is probably not, you want to classify it as a portable mount, but light enough that you can still pick it up and move it around in your property and then set everything up on.
Yeah. What's the payload on that then? What's the payload on your CEM60?
I think, okay, now I am going to have to look at that again, because I can't remember.
Because the Ioptron ones they seem to take a lot of payload for the size of them, don't they? Like, I think
they do, and I think that one has technical specs. So that it's the mount. So that the mount weight was 12.3 kilos. So you've got to be able to carry that around, and the payload was 27 kilos.
Right.
Or 27.2 to be exact. So that has got lots of capacity still to put still a reasonable size telescope on it. But the other thing that I also say to people is, when I say always say to people, the small number of people who've asked me questions on Instagram, but is that don't think about just the telescope, the weight of the telescope on there, because it won't take long. If you're really going to get into it, it won't take long before you have the telescope, and then you've got the guide scope on the top with its guide camera, and then you've got your DSLR or your cooled camera, and then you might have a focal reducer or a flattener on it, and then you might have some sort of power or computer thing on it, like a little NUC, or even NUC, or an ASA Air Pro, or you'll have some power distribution thing like the Pegasus Astro power box things. Suddenly it becomes quite heavy. And so
a few kilos,
you need to consider that too, because you're often putting another bar, another dovetail on top of the telescope to be able to cope with all those things to be added on, and those weigh a fair ton anyway.
Yeah, especially the Losmandy ones. I noticed because I recently, after I got my Newtonian 6-inch Newtonian, which exactly like you say, I upgraded to that because it was super affordable at so that would have been how much was that again? I think it was $600 for a 6-inch Newtonian. So that's the Skywatcher 150 PDS. And I upgraded, I didn't really upgrade. I got another option, like we said. And by the time I'd put the bar on that, it added a significant amount of weight to it. And it kind of ties into what you're saying, because I began with the HEQ5 Pro mount, which is rated, I think, to carry about, I think it's rated to about 15 kilos, something like that. So ideally you want about 7.5 kilos on it, 8 for imaging. And that's when I found that I was starting to drop subs. So I was getting these, I was getting the blurred stars, I was getting bits of things happening, and I reckon I was losing probably 50% of my exposures, even though that is a really good mount that I'm still using now. As soon as you go to a certain weight on it, then it stops, like you say, it didn't have that margin anymore. So I've recently upgraded to the AZGT, which is basically like a Skywatcher NEQ6 Pro in terms of its payload capacity. And that's the other really popular mount that everybody in the Skywatcher tends to get, because of exactly like you say, it's got such a good range in what it'll carry. But now I'm finding that probably only dropping about, providing it's not too windy, I'm probably only dropping about 15% of my subs now, So such a huge difference. And
I guess you need to think about the future and what you do want to. It's hard to think about the future, but I think that what people probably find realistically, if you really get into the hobby and you really enjoy it and it starts to take over, that you do find you do want a range of telescopes. One is not enough. You do cover those focal lengths, and you don't necessarily, I think, have to go, well, am I really going to be interested in planetary that much? I don't think an SCT is just for planetary, because the galaxies, of course, really do. That's also where they shine as, and the longer focal length one. So a big Newtonian or something like that, or a big refractor. You need the money for that. But that's where we can get those big focal lengths, and you can really get the galaxies quite nicely.
Because I guess when you're talking about sort of deep sky stuff, like just nebula, like you say, if it's, whether it's like a wide field, like whether you're starting off with like an 80mm or a 70mm refractor or a red cat, you can always find something that's going to look good in that field of view. But once you get up to galaxies, you're all of a sudden your focal length probably needs to be more like, what would you say, like 1500, or like, I mean, when I say 1500, I mean to give you lots of options in galaxies. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I think if you could be, oops, excuse me, need a drink of water now.
Maybe 1250, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess. See, so the Skywatcher I've got is 840, and I can get a few galaxies in there, but they're still not huge in the field of view. And if you really want to make them look impressive, then you've got to crop quite a bit. At the other extreme, I kind of think that you want to be definitely over 1,000. And if you're at somewhere between 1,200 to 1,500, that would be quite good. If you can afford to go closer or more zoomed in, higher focal length, then you can go up to 2,000, because like an 8-inch. Well, again, I know about the Meads, but the Skywatcher with the Celestrons, I'm not sure what. I presume they're probably similar. But if you went for an SCT, for example, an 8-inch is, I think it's got 2,000mm focal length.
Yeah.
And that is also substantially lighter than a 10-inch. So that's the other thing to consider, that you've got 2,000 versus 2,500. So there's not a huge difference there in focal length, but there is in weight and what you're maneuvering around. And
that's probably why most people do tend to, like you say, if you end up in the hobby, you do end up probably getting multiple scopes. And I'm already at the stage now where, and I've told you, I'm trying not to buy anything yet, but I'm already at the stage now where like I'm interested in the whole hobby, and
Yeah.
I enjoy the wide stuff, like with this little rig. I enjoy the medium sort of level stuff, you know, nebula with my Newtonian, which is up to like 750 mil. But of course, now as soon as I'm thinking about galaxies, it's like, well, my Newtonian can maybe take one or two down here, like, you know, barred spiral, sculptor, things that are reasonably big. But of course, now I'm sort of thinking, oh, a Schmidt-Cassegrain would be really nice, because now I can get up to that bigger focal length. And, you know, and they're not, like you say, an 8-inch is not super heavy. I think maybe an 8-inch is about 6 kilos. So not really much heavier than my Newtonian. For a Celestron 8-inch, maybe a bit more than 6. But yeah, and it's like, well, there's not really there's not really one scope that's going to do everything.
No.
And I think what you were saying before is that at least if you've, like, because you said, like, when you initially started off with a Schmidt-Cassegrain, because that's what you had before, it can really put you off. But like, you know, I'm at the stage now where you've at least had the rewards of having a reasonably wide focal length. It wasn't too daunting to get into. You got some good pictures. You've understood the basic concepts like plate solving, go-to. You understand that, you know, guiding at a longer focal length is going to be more of a challenge than a short one. So it's now not such a big, you know, I'm not going to be too disappointed if they're not perfect straight away, and I'll know how to work at getting it better. But if you jump straight in at that, if you jump straight in at that focal length, you can imagine how it could kill the hobby for people.
Yeah. You don't want to jump in somewhere it's going to put you off, because it's a fantastic hobby. It's lots of fun. It's you know, incredible the stuff that you can photograph that you wouldn't even imagine that you could possibly do.
Once you take that first image of Orion or something, you're like, I thought this was only like Hubble that could do things like this. You know, like
I know, and suddenly you can get this from your backyard and all that kind of stuff. You know, shorter focal length, I reckon, is the place to start. And if you've got a DSLR already that you can put on the back, go for that. Start with that. It's already there. You can get some fantastic images. I don't think it even, if you know, Astro modified would be fantastic, but if you don't, I mean, I remember that's how.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the first camera I got, and that's a Canon. It's a Canon 6D, and I got it online off eBay from a store that seemed to sell a lot of these that were Astro modified, and that was my first camera, and I had a lot of fun with that, and I still use it now just for wide field stuff, like Milky Way wide field stuff. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So is that what you were saying? Is that what you started with?
I started with actually, I had the Sony. This is the AZ7.
Look at you with your fancy Sony AZ7.
Oh yeah, well, I wanted to get back into general photography, and this. There we go. Can we see it there?
It's because you're too busy putting your fancy
that's
S3 120 Tarantula Nebula in the background.
You've got this is not Astro modified, obviously, and but I just put that on the back of the 10-inch, and I had the AZ mount, and I did 30-second exposures. But I remember at the time I pointed it to the Pinwheel Galaxy, and it was like, I just remember seeing the back of the screen and going, "You are kidding me! I can see spiral arms. This is ridiculous. Really?" Then I pointed at Eta Carina, and, you know, suddenly, or Carina Nebula, should say. Eta Carina, I think, is the name of the star, isn't it? Carina Nebula. And again, I could see detail, I could see color, and it was just amazing. You know, that was a hook. It hooked me. And of course, Orion, of course, suddenly seeing color.
I've noticed that I remember that the shop that I got this from as well, they would allow you to send your existing, I mean, people don't always want to do this because, you know, you don't want to, you know, you still want your DSLR taking the same images as it normally would, but I think it was $500 if you sent your DSLR in to Astro modify it. I know there's like DIY videos online, but I wasn't game to try those. So you can send it in for that was like 500 Australian dollars. So I bought the actual camera already Astro modified, but that cost was incorporated into the price of the camera, which I was happy to pay. And I think also the reason, like, as well, like talking about things like cost, I think that you can get definitely cheaper options than this. You don't have to go with a Canon 6D. You can get I think a lot of people get the Canon Rebel something or other, which is a much cheaper camera to get into it. But also, I think the big advantage of these is that most people already know how to use a DSLR. So it's not like you have to start learning all the software to control your camera and all that as well, which, you know, can be good because you've already got a lot to learn with, you know, the equatorial mount and plate solving and go to. And
plus the whole back focus thing doesn't become a big issue because you get the adapter that fits your camera and you put that on.
Yeah, it's the adapter. Yeah.
And then you can look at a cooled camera later down the track.
That's a new concept, isn't it, for people who are just getting into astrophotography? I mean, I'm still with one shot, even though I'm on a dedicated astrophotography camera now, a cooled astrophotography camera, I'm still staying with one shot color. I'm not going to say forever because I know what astrophotography is like. It draws you in and you end up changing. But for now, at least, I'm happy with that. But then there's the whole mono route, which we probably have to give that a different conversation because that in itself is another, you know, topic.
It's another step up in cost as well because of all the extras that are required.
Yeah.
So that's where, again, so I started with a color camera, which was the ASI 294 MC Pro. And that was great. And I think it was a really good place also to start. It gave me really good images that I was happy with. And also you can just keep shooting. You don't have the cost of the filter wheel, the filters, all those sorts of things as well. And the added complication of having to, well, most of the software will, you know, do it automatically for you now, but
still time, isn't it? Yeah.
Again, I think that the gap I feel is, and I'm sure there will be experts who would shoot me down for saying this, but I think, you know, one of the big things about going a one-shot color versus a mono was that because with a mono camera, you can use the whole of the sensor to do your different colors, your filters, then you can get that definition, whereas your color camera, of course, is using the Bayer matrix, so you're only using for the red a quarter of your, you know, for a quarter for the red, a quarter for the blue, and a half for the green, and so the definition isn't quite there, but as good, which has made me go on to the 1600. But you know, you look at images now with the 26 color versus images with the 26, you know, mono. And it's very hard because you don't actually have the image yourself to look at. So you're often looking at people's images, maybe on YouTube or whatever, but you could look at Astro bin, you can still get the full versions, but man, it's hard to tell the difference, you know. They're you know,
it's probably mainly, I guess one advantage would be probably like, say if me and you were to take an image, I mean, yours would be much better anyway because you actually know how to use PixInsight and I just pretend to. But yours, but you'd probably, I'm guessing, and I don't know this for sure, but you've got the 2600. Actually, I'll just mention why we're here, that when we keep going on about these numbers, like 2600, 294, it's the equivalent of how Canon have all the different model numbers, like 6D and 5D. The ZWO cameras, which are the big camera manufacturer in astrophotography, they basically just number their cameras, don't they? Like they're not very, I was going to say sexy sounding, but they're not very cool sounding. They're just like a bunch of numbers with pro on the end usually. Yeah. And the pro bit doesn't necessarily mean you're a professional now. It just means that you're going to get cooling on your camera.
yeah. That's something. Yeah. It's not necessarily make you into a pro. Exactly.
Like, yes, I'm a professional. I got the 2600 MC Pro. But I'm guessing if me and you were to take the same image, that I'd need, is it fair to say I'd need quite a bit more time to get the same results as you because you're using the whole sensor?
I don't know, but then at the same time, you can just keep shooting the same setup. You don't have to start faffing around with changing filters. Yeah. So I don't know. I haven't really done a direct comparison. I guess people would, in theory, you suggest that the mono one would give slightly better definition because it's using the whole thing, but I don't know because you look at these images from the 2600 color camera and they just you look at them and you go, that must be a mono camera, surely.
How dare you take such a good image?
Well, I think compared to when we were comparing, say, the 1600 mono versus the 294 color, one-shot color, I think there was more of a difference there. Do you have to get into pixel peeping before you actually notice that difference?
That's a good point, actually, because if I consider my ZWO 2600 MC Pro, God, it's a mouthful. If I consider that just in terms of cost, I'm thinking I bought the camera and then I bought a Optolong L Extreme filter for it. And I've actually got the L Enhance as well. But let's just say, for example, I bought the camera and I need to buy one filter. I'm probably talking, I think they're about $3,000-ish now for the camera. And then it would have cost me $400 for the Optolong L Extreme filter. So let's say approximately $3,400, $3,600, maybe something like that. But how much would it have added to your camera setup to buy the filter wheel and the filters?
Yeah, well, and again, what filters do you get? So because they can go crazy. So you can go with, I think I went middle of the road at the time, because at the time also there were just the Astrodon and the Chroma ones, Astrodon Chroma, which were the super expensive ones. And then you had down sort of more, well, I thought we're sort of around the middle area, which is probably, well, Astronomics, the Beta. I sort of thought of the Optolong ones as being the middle of the road as well. I mean, I'm sure people will have different opinions in saying that, no, these are better than these. So I went middle of the road, I think, there. But now, of course, you've got the Antlia, that's how you say it, that have come in and now bridged that gap between the cost of the Chroma and the Astrodon and those other ones like the Beta and the Astronomic that go to 3 nanometers and still give you, that really, really fine wavelength that you're filtering. So, yeah, it depends, because the filters will chuck a huge cost on depending on where you go. So that's the other thing, is if you're going to spend the money on a camera called Camera, which is $2,600 or $3,000, you probably want some good filters to go with it. So that's going to add a lot of money to it. And filter wheels, I guess, they will add a bit more too. They add more there as well, but they're not a huge jump up. It's the filters that really push it. Yeah.
So it'd be like, what do you reckon if you like got a full set of, I think you can use the 1.25-inch filters for your sort of camera chip size, the crop sensor. So if you had a full set of luminance, red, green, blue, and the SHO filters, would it be like at least, I don't know, I'm guessing it's at least $1,000 Australian, isn't it? More?
Yeah, I think it cost me to get, I got 2-inch ones for my, which actually works very well for the 2600.
Right.
I don't know what's so I think you need to be bigger than the 1.25-inch, don't you, for something like the 2600?
Yeah, you might. I couldn't remember if it's only the like full frames that you can get. You have to have the 2-inch, or whether it's the crop sensor ones, or maybe it's just the 4/3 size sensor. I can't remember.
I think when I got my Optolong LRGB and SHO filters, and that was the 7 nanometer ones for the SHO or HSO or whatever you want to say. I think, was that about $1,500 in total for that? I think it was. I know that I know here in New Zealand, you can get the exactly the same filters. I did get them at the time, because at the time I couldn't get them here, but now you can get them here. So I got mine from First Light Optics and in the UK, and got them sent out, which was also good because it didn't pay the VAT. I'm just looking now here. If I go to our local supplier, so the HA filter 2-inch Optolong, for example, is a 2-inch, is $425 by itself.
Wow. Yeah, so, I'm just looking now at the Testar site, and it's got the package that you can buy, and it's the 36mm filters, and that whole package, which is Optolong LRGB and Optolong hydrogen, sulfur, and oxygen filters, so the SHO, is $5,549, including the filter wheel as well. So as a package, so you're roughly 2,000 grand, 2,000. Oh no, not 2,000, because I would have got the I still had to get the L Extreme. So a little bit under, probably maybe $1,800, $1,700 more than I would have paid to get my setup. But
so that's the thing, and the problem is, if you then decide that you want to go for Astrodon or Chroma filters, I think I've worked out in New Zealand dollars, which is pretty much worth not much anywhere else.
2 million.
Yeah. I put that on, I think it was on one of Chuck's live streams, and he was talking about things about the cost. And I said, oh yeah, those are about, I see they're this much US, which is about 4 million New Zealand dollars, you know.
Yeah, everything's 4 million New Zealand dollars, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, I'm actually trying to find where the filters are on this, on First Light Optics.
Oh, you're right.
But
it's got the second kit here, which is the Antilla equivalent. How much is that? Let's have a look. Where is it? Bundles, here we are. 2600 Pro kit. And the Antilla version of that is another, how much is it? $800. So it goes up to $6,400 now if you get the, we shouldn't, maybe we're putting, I've just thought we're probably putting people off now. They're going, wait, the camera itself is going to cost me like as much as a small used hatchback. Like,
yeah, but having said that, we should go back. We're talking about the cameras that we've got, we're getting to now, but things still like the 1600, which you can pick up either secondhand or whatever, are fantastic cameras, which are great with the 1.25 inch filters, which are way cheaper than going your 2-inch or whatever filters. You can do some amazing photography, as has been proven by plenty of people, with that setup, which is way cheaper than buying a 2600 ASI 2600 camera and 2 filters, you know.
I think it's pretty, you can definitely get into it. Like you can get a reasonable ZWO camera color for around, you know, anywhere between $1,000 and like you know, probably $1,400. It's going to do a really good job. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also when you're deciding between, and I see this mentioned quite a bit, and I know this is something that Luke mentioned on his channel, was that it's something to consider too. But when, you know, how much imaging time do you think you're going to get a year? What is your weather like? Do you live in Chile and you happen to be living high elevation, and you get, or you're perhaps in the Arizona desert where you get tons and tons of clear skies and, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, if you're in that situation where you're going to get lots and lots of nights imaging, plus maybe you don't have a full-time job, and you can afford to image a lot, then the mono, you're going to have time to do mono. But if you have a limited time frame for doing your astrophotography, whether it be weather, whether it be work, again, your one-shot color is a fantastic option, because you can sit there in a night and you can shoot through and accumulate. You know, you could do one night and get 5, 6, depending on what time of the year it is. But you could get, you know, anywhere between 3 and 7, or in the middle of winter, 8 hours of stuff that you can get a fantastic image with. Versus the mono, where you're going to go, well, I've got to get 2 hours of this filter and 2 hours of this filter and 2 hours of this, you know. And you might get 8 hours, but you've actually only got 2 hours for each filter, and that will help. But so again, you know, look at what you think your time would be like imaging. Also, how much time you want to spend processing as well, just because of the extra complication of mono. I think that's a really good point, actually, because I remember that when I was sort of getting into this and I was watching people's YouTube channels and stuff, one thing I think about now in hindsight is pick people that seem to match like the way you think about either photography, but also their lifestyle as well. Because some people are obviously like looking for like getting tons of data and like an award-winning image, and they've got loads of time to spend, and maybe they've even got, I mean, I know you've got an observatory that you can use, whereas for me, it's kind of like my telescope does stay kind of under a cover in the back garden. Well, one of them does anyway, my mount. So my mount stays there on the garden, but I still have to take my telescope each time and put it on and then take it off. You know what I mean? Unless I get, like today is a rare example where we got 2 clear nights in a row, or 3 clear nights. But like you say then, because I've just got a one-shot color with a filter in it, I can just put the scope on and it doesn't seem such a burden then. Like it just feels like I can just go, you know? I think
that's a very good point. Look at a variety of different well, look at a lot of YouTube videos. I do actually recommend it because I've learnt everything that I know of my,
I reckon I have
limited knowledge from YouTube videos, and you know, you look at all different ones and you pick and choose what suits to what you want. But I think if you do look at all these different videos, you get more of a balanced idea of how people do astrophotography and how it will suit you, because you will get people who are like absolute, you know, you must go mono, or you know, you're not doing it justice kind of thing, which is, you know, complete bollocks. And then you'll get people who are just down the OSC, you know, one-shot color version, because they don't want to spend the time. So if you can look at the different things, people will give, not so much don't want to spend the time. So it's a very bad thing to say. I have to cut that, but that sounds terribly negative. Don't have the time, or are limited by their weather, limited by their job, etc. And get a feel for those and what people are doing, and then apply it to what's my situation. And that's where I thought, you know, when I saw Luke's video, he's gone color and he's gone mono, and he's come back to, he's currently doing mostly color, a one-shot color, I think. And you know, he made the point. there's a weather situation involved, which is really affecting your time, because you don't want to. You also want to see the end of the conveyor belt. You don't want to be continuously at the front of the conveyor belt, never seeing the final product. So if your weather is such that you can't, you know, it's going to take you a month or 2 months to complete a project, to collect the hours in a mono setup, that could be really off-putting, and you could lose interest. You know, it could be very frustrating. Whereas at least the one-shot color version, you can still keep getting a great result, you know, relatively frequently, and the weather is allowing you to do that. So I think I think that's a really good point. Look at the different options. Don't look at just what we're saying. Look at what other people are saying.
It's like any hobby, isn't it? Because I think even once you've decided you're going to commit to it, and maybe you buy 1 or 2 setups, you'll still like you say, go through phases where you just can't be bothered to do that particular object again in the sky, or for whatever reason, you're just happy to do a few hours on something rather than put in all the time. It kind of just goes through ebbs and flows, doesn't it? Or like you say, you've got commitments in your life that mean you can only grab a certain amount of time, you know, in a certain time frame.
And that's all fine, because all of those options are great options. There's not one, you know, just because somebody does say spend 20, 30, 40, 50 hours on doing astrophotography doesn't make them better than the person who wants to not spend that much time on it. It's just a different way of doing it.
I think it's like any hobby, isn't it? It's just don't get caught up in the don't get caught up if I think if anybody's got an attitude which is too belligerent in one direction, then then you probably kind of want to steer away from them a little bit. You know, I've been into hiking for like years, and I've got tons of tents and different gear. And, you know, sometimes you get a person who will ask just a simple question about where they should begin, and somebody's going to tell them, you have got to get this tent and you have got to get this sleeping bag. And it's like, you know, $5,000's worth, and they're not even sure if they're going to be into hiking yet. It's like,
I know. And also, because that's the thing is, are you going to be into hiking in the bush where it might get down to 3 degrees, or are you going to be hiking up the mountains where it's going to be -15 or -20? It's a whole, it's a whole different way of looking at it and approaching the hobby. It doesn't make one better than the other. Just because, you know, because you hike into -20 degrees areas doesn't mean it's better than hiking into 10 degree areas. You know? So it's the same thing with astrophotography, I think. And I think that you need to have a look and see what is going to give you the most joy. Because at the end of it, it's not necessarily the best picture. It's what gives you the most joy. I think. Exactly. And makes you want to keep doing it. And if you get caught up with, I must spend 20 or 30 hours on an image, you can turn around putting yourself off after a while, going, I'm just not getting through any stuff, and the weather's terrible, and I'm not finishing anything, you know. So that's where I think you've got to think, what is going to give me the most joy?
I think I think that thing, and you do hear astrophotographers say it sometime as well, because it's very easy to drop into, is don't get too caught up, especially when you begin, don't get too caught up in comparing your images, because if you go in Astro bin and you type in, you know, Tarantula Nebula, like that amazing photo that's in your backdrop or something, it's really easy to think, my God, yeah, it's pretty stunning, yeah. But you can easily think, Jesus, what happened to my Tarantula Nebula? It's like, you know, you look at your own and you start thinking, this is not very good, is it? You know, maybe I'm not very good at this hobby or something, you know.
Yeah, because you've also got to realize that none of us started with the images that we're doing now. You know, I look back at the images and I remember looking at I don't even know if I don't even have them on here, but that's why I think when we mentioned something before when we talked, that you shouldn't look back at those first images with shame. You should look back at those first images with I don't know, joy, or be pleased about them, because they got you to move to where you are today, because it's those first simple ones that you look at that hooked you. And I think you look at those, and it's nice because you look back at them and you go, oh, okay, I am making progress. So they're good to keep, but as you said, don't expect your first images to look like Astrobin. I think most people still get pretty amazed by their first images, regardless.
Yeah, I was blown away when I first took through this camera, attached to my 80mm refractor, and when I first took both actually Carina as well, like, because Carina is so massive for us guys, I was like blown away that I could get that on just like a minute or two. You know, it was just phenomenal.
There we go. That was my first tarantula image. You can see that there.
That's still pretty good. I was hoping for worse than that, right?
I think I'll zoom in a bit, because I think this was with the DSLR on the back.
Yeah.
And that was, so you can see the stars are a bit elongated in here, like that, you know.
Yeah.
And I think a bunch of 30-second or 40-second images.
But that would be enough to hook you in, wouldn't it? Like, you'd be, yeah.
This was Carina. You know, you can hardly see anything, but you can see part of the keyhole nebula there. I mean, it's massive around here, but I was just blown away.
So was that with your Schmidt Cassegrain and your DSLR, was it?
That was with the Schmidt Cassegrain and the Sony A7 on the back.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's nice.
And I can't remember, I think, this was and that was my first Southern Pinwheel Galaxy.
Oh, yeah. But it's still amazing when you start taking, like you say, in terms of your excitement and enjoyment, when you see that on a screen, it's amazing, isn't it?
When you see spiral arms in the Galaxy on the back of your... Yeah, these are stacked, but you could still see it on the back of the screen on the camera, and you suddenly go, you're kidding me. I can actually see spiral arms of a galaxy. I can see color. I can capture it, not see it. I shouldn't say see color, because our eyes will just see the gray. But, you know, that's the thing that it's still cool to look back at those images and go, they were very exciting. And in many ways, they can be even more exciting than the images you capture later. Because you are just stunned for the first time. You look at them and you go, I cannot believe I can get this from my backyard.
I think I'll just show this one. I think I've got let me see if I can show this window.
If you share something on screen, that way I can...
Is that sharing?
Yep.
So that is, again, you can see like I got the elongated stars and stuff in it, but that's one of the first images I took with my DSLR attached to my Sky Rover. I didn't have guiding at this point, so I think I could only take, I can't remember if they were like a minute long images, and I think I took 20. But again, it just blew me away that I didn't even think you could get stuff like that. Like, you know,
well, that's way more comprehension. That's way more than I got with my Carina. So,
well, that's the difference, I guess. Like kind of how we were talking at the beginning is that's about a 400mm focal length, and yours would have been maybe about what, 2000 or something like that.
Yeah, 2,500. So I can't see it. You probably can't see my pointer, but yeah, just in there. But you've still picked up a lot more HA. With
That's because, yeah, the Astro mod, and that was one of my early ones of Orion. And again, I was like completely blown away, like that I could even get that. Just couldn't sort of fathom it at all, that you could actually, yeah. And like you say, it's all about how much you're enjoying it, because, yeah, when I first took those, I was just so happy that I actually managed to do it. Yeah.
It's good to look back on those, because there is that, in that way you can sometimes still use, I mean, it's still really cool what happens. You still get quite a, enjoy getting out and doing it, but you can look back at those and you do get that nice little joy of remembering how stunned and amazed you were that you could get that, which is, I wouldn't say it disappears, but it's not as great, because there's almost an expectation now, but you're going to see something, you're going to see some color, you're going to get some detail. And the more you do it, or the more time you spend on it, or whatever, the more detail you get, more pleased you are. But I don't think it's nice to remember those first sort of holy crap moment, which I think is really, really, which are really cool. Yeah. And it grabs you.
And you run inside the house to show your partner, check that out. I took that photo.
You pasted all over Facebook.
And now going, like, in retrospect, going backwards, like how impressed they are of you is totally out of context, because so many people take these images that are like so much better than yours. But again, you're not used to it, and nobody's used to, like, you don't think that you can do that with normal gear that you can just use from your backyard. Yeah.
And that's what's actually also quite nice about well, the interaction of most of the astrophotography community is that you post an image up, you see people posting an image up, and it's their first image of something, and you look at it, and I think you'll see that, like, you can post up an image of yourself that you've put up, oh, it's really good, you think it's really great, and it might get 20 likes, 30 likes, and then somebody will put one up that is their very first image, and it's very early days, like our first ones, but it'll have like 85 likes or something, and people are going, that's awesome. And that's what's really nice, is that people, I think, also do remember that first bit of excitement they had. Yeah. And you don't want to kill that. You don't want to sit there and go, it's a bit crap, compared to now.
Yeah, I'm not should have used guiding on that.
And I know it shouldn't be about likes, but it is quite nice for people that they get excited. Yeah. They share it. And then they get some of that excitement shared back, and people go, yep, that's really cool, fantastic, and then that lifts you a bit more, and you go on again. And so that's actually quite nice to see, that people go, that's awesome, that you're capturing the first images and things. It's later on when you're doing it for a while that people look at your images and go, move on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't like your color palette on that one, but yeah, it's an image. Yeah. All right, so I reckon we've probably given people enough to think about on their first rig. Yeah. I reckon what we should finish off with is, if we had to recommend our first rig, what would we go for? Do you want me to go first, or you?
Yeah, you go first.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
All right, you have a drink. So it's really difficult, because two rigs come to mind for me, in that I don't regret at all that I went in with my 80mm refractor and a HEQ5 Pro mount. I felt that was a real sweet spot to get in, but I'm torn between going with that and this little rig here that I got set up, just because of how versatile this is. So I think I'm just going to go with this portable rig. So that's the Skywatcher AZ GTI, which has been modified for equatorial mode. And Sue of the Lazy Geek has a really good video on how to modify that, which I used, and which is really useful. And then what I would probably do to start with is, if you've got a DSLR, I would just shove my DSLR in it. Ideally, if you've got like something like maybe a 135mm lens or a 200mm lens, I'd probably use that. Or you can do wide field Milky Way if that's what you want to do. And I'd probably recommend as well, again, it depends on money. But you can either use Nina to start with and control it all through Nina, like free astrophotography software. Or if you want something that's maybe, I think you could probably say it's a bit simpler for someone starting out, the ASI Air connected to that mount, it's really good, because then you just control it from your phone or a tablet. And I think you can polar align through the mount, so that's not going to be an issue. It's yeah, you can control your subs. It's got the go-to, you've got the go-to functionality there. You can put it in your car if you want to, or you can use it from the back garden. And if you want, you can then take that next step to probably like a little 50 or 60 mil refractor if you want to on that rig. You could probably get away with that, like kind of like you've got with a Red Cat. So, and I reckon in terms of cost, that would probably be around maybe around that $1,500 mark, and not including a camera, of course. So that's probably what I would recommend for a first rig. And you're going to reuse it as well. You're going to keep using that. Yeah.
And I'll go on this, since you've talked about that one as being, because I agree that's a fantastic place to start. If I was thinking about more, say somebody had been doing a bit of astrophotography, whether it be Milky Way stuff or whatever, and they did decide they want to take that next step into astrophotography, I would say, and obviously cost will always come into it, but if you see yourself as somebody who you think you're going to go with it for a while, that you think, it's hard to know, but you sort of see what people have and you think, yeah, I can understand why people have got different options for different telescopes, and I need, get a range of telescopes. I would suggest get a mount, get an equatorial mount, don't get an AZ mount, first off. Secondly, I would recommend, and again, cost comes into it, but if you want a bit of longevity from it and you want it to fit with an extra different telescopes and slightly bigger telescopes to cover bigger and smaller ones, go for the equivalent of the Ioptron CM60, which is now the 70, because it'll last you for those bigger telescopes. If you're not going to go, if you don't think you're ever going to go bigger, then obviously you can go for something cheaper.
Would that be, is that like the NEQ6 Pro equivalent, kind of like that, like 20 kilo payload limit? Is that what they say?
Yeah, it's sort of around this. I think the CM70 was 27 kilo. CM60 was 27 kilos, and the CM70 is a bit more.
Right.
But it just means that you can load up a decent sized telescope with all the peripheries, and it's going to handle it, and it gives you that range. As far as telescope is concerned, I'd probably suggest, if we're not talking about a DSLR on the back of a scope or something like that, I would say don't go long focal length, go shorter focal length, and maybe look at something between like the Red Cat 250 up to, maybe say 500, or maybe even, you can still get 700, and that'll be much easier to use. That wider field of view, that shorter focal length is far more forgiving when it comes to guiding, wind, particularly if it's not big. As far as the type of telescope, see, I don't know anything about Newtonians. I just know that they're really good telescopes, and they're not expensive.
Yeah.
But there's the negative side, I suppose, is you have to collimate them every time. But then people say once you get used to that, it's a less than 5-minute job.
It's not hard, but if I think, like you're saying, if I had to give the advice of the first scope, I think I'd still go refractor, even though it's going to cost you a bit more. I think just for that like little portability of sticking it on, and it's not at all clumsy, and also like your mount can really easily handle the weight of it. Maybe if money is a real consideration, like, and you can't really get up to that like $1,000 mark, like, then I think probably like my Skywatcher 150, which is a 6-inch Newtonian, is actually a really great option, as long as you don't mind just getting past collimation a little bit and a few little tweaks like that. Then I think, like, because that's $600 Australian, which is, and the images are amazing for the price. Because I think I noticed that William Optics still do some pretty decent focal length, like 70 mil, but they're doublets. They're kind of quite affordable doublets, maybe only about $800, $900. And I'm not, maybe that's not that bad to,
No, I think it's probably, it is. And again, it's a whole matter of cost.
So presumably your setup, you're also thinking like an astrophotography camera as well. Like, what do you reckon you go with?
A one-shot color camera. and you don't have to go for the 2600, which is obviously quite flash, but there are the other ones still, like the 294 MC Pro. I think the 533 isn't there.
Yeah.
One shot colors that people love with a more square frame. I think that's a really good place also to start, because you can really get you can get a really good start to collecting images, and you can see the end of that conveyor belt without having to go through the long-winded process that mono is, and the long-winded process may be more of processing that mono does. And then if you can afford it, get the 2600 color camera.
That's kind of what I ended up doing, thinking, oh, you know, I heard so much good stuff about that camera that I was like, oh, I'm going to regret it if I get something else, because then I'll be like, everybody's talking about this like it's God's gift to astrophotography, so I better just jump in and have a go. Yeah.
Apart from the oil stroke silicon leak issue, which
has come up. So basically your setup is primarily, at least first, you're placing the emphasis, which you hear a lot, on the mount. So how much would a mount like that cost, do you reckon?
So
I know the Skywatcher one, the equivalent is about 2,500 Australian, something like that.
Yeah,
2.8 maybe.
Well, I guess I shouldn't really go by New Zealand cost, should I?
So 2 million.
2 million. Well, okay. So we got the price here. So the CEM 70 here is basically $5,000. It's not cheap.
Yeah.
But if you are anywhere else in the world, where are we? If I can find another place, I'll see in this Australia, it's 4.1.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. In Aussie. And I'm just trying to find. But you see, in the US, it's 2.8.
Right.
It makes a big difference. Still expensive. I mean, it's still expensive. It's still, it's more the thing, I guess, that's where I've put sort of, when I've spoken to people and put the emphasis on, I've said, look, if you think you're really going to want to get into it, and you think you're going to want to have a range of telescopes on there, try and spend a bit of money on the mount.
I certainly knew after I got my HEQ5, which was only $1,700, like it wasn't an expensive mount, but I knew after about 3 or 4 months, I really wish I'd have gone the next one up, which would have been the NEQ6 Pro. Yeah.
That's the only problem is it's quite an expense. But it's just that if you can afford it,
but I think
try and put more into that mount, and you can still use it with a Red Cat, which is quite cheap, or use it with a cheaper Newtonian. Yeah. But later on, you can still chuck, a nice refractor. Yeah.
That'd be a cool combo, wouldn't it? If you did spend most of your money on a mount, which I think, like you say, is the best thing to do. Even then, like $600 on a Newtonian, I mean, you've got a pretty decent little setup that will last you. It'll get you well started. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and you'll get amazing images from it. You should get really, really good images from it. Knowing now that I've wanted to get telescopes, and also a lot of it is to do with all the peripheries, because you talk about the telescope weight, but you've got to add on all that other stuff. And it can weigh a ton. By the time you add on all your cameras and your flatteners and
I think that's a really good point as well, because one thing that took me by surprise is, once I'd bought my telescope, that 80mm refractor, which was about $1,600, I'd not really factored in the flattener. And I was like, and then someone tells you, hang on, if you're going to do astrophotography, you need this little piece of glass that's going to sit in there. And by the way, that's going to be another $500. And you're like, what? The telescope just cost me $1,600, and now they're making me pay for this as well.
So why did it come flat field?
Exactly.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. There's a lot of extras that you do have to that you will inevitably end up with if you want to get into it. Because also, as you want to get into it more and spend more of your time imaging, you will tend to go more towards the lazy option, I suppose. Yeah. Where you don't want to have to be necessarily, that's where it can get into where it's not necessarily, I guess, so lazy. Maybe it's more to do with making the most of your limited imaging time, where you want to be the most economical in your time.
Yeah.
And so, and I guess, and it's a whole different discussion, but that's where if you can, you know, develop some sort of setup, some sort of observatory setup, whether it be something, just a little thing that looks like an outhouse rolls over the way from your telescope or whatever to cover it up so it's ready to go, or you go an observatory roll-off roof, or you know, a dome.
Hang about, Logan. I'm not sure we can factor this in. So
no, I've gone too far.
We just need. So don't forget to put $7,000 aside for your observatory as well, just in case. Could you imagine? That would be hilarious. Could you imagine somebody just buying a little mount like mine and then saying to their partner, "I got the dome as well to cover myself." You know, they got this little mount inside.
Yeah, maybe we'll just cut that bit. We won't talk about that bit because
no. Maybe we'll keep that for the next. Maybe we'll keep it for the next chat.
Skip too far. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. I reckon that's a pretty good. I don't know if we've confused everyone or made things.
I think probably have. Yeah.
But that's astrophotography, isn't it? Basically. Yeah. So yeah, I reckon like maybe for our next chat we'll go into like one of these a bit more. You know, we'll pick a particular subject or something. But I think this is enough to get everyone started who's thinking about the hobby.
Yeah. Or we've completely put people off.
Or we've just put an entire generation of people off astrophotography for life. Yeah.
I guess the one thing to finish with is you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money to still get some really good and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I think the example of your setup behind you is probably a prime example.
And also don't discount secondhand, because there's a lot of good secondhand stuff. Yeah. Yeah. People like us who are constantly upgrading, and then you get rid of the, you know, and then someone, then perfect to start you off. I've seen a bunch of stuff over this last year, secondhand, great little setups. And sometimes people, the whole thing, the mount, the scope, the camera, they've either decided it's not for them, or they're moving up completely. And they're really affordable, good price setups.
And it's not that there's anything wrong with the thing. It's like you've decided, well, I've decided to concentrate on mono. So I don't need my one-shot color camera anymore. Not because the one-shot color camera is crap. It's just that I'm not doing one-shot color camera. I'm doing the mono thing now.
Yeah.
Although maybe you should keep a hold of it in case you come back to it. Because or again, you know, you could keep that color camera because it would be great for your portable system.
Yeah.
Where you take a filter wheel.
Yeah.
And you know,
and then I forgot one of the filters. Oh, you know,
so
at a dark side. Yeah. Cool. All right. So if any beginners out there are watching this, that's Australia's and New Zealand's contribution to getting started in astrophotography. And you can check out our channels, Logan's Astrophotography and Ollie's Astro on YouTube. And I hope we've made everything as clear as mud for you.
Yep, clear as mud.